Since the dawn of history, humans have tried to understand that thick shadow that blocks the light of humanity. They have tried to understand the nature of evil, but modern science, away from myths and imaginary notions, offers us terrifying explanations. Evil is not a supernatural force, but something that can grow in the very soil of human experiments. Let's look at history, at those moments when science wore a mask of horror. In the corridors of Nazi concentration camps, Dr. Joseph Mengele stood recording the names of twins to perform his horrific experiments on them. He would sew them together, expose them to extreme cold, all in a mad attempt to prove a supposed racial superiority. And Europe was not the only stage for these tragedies. In Japan, Unit 731 of the Imperial Army practiced torture in complete secrecy. They performed vivisections on conscious people without anesthesia, intentionally infected them with diseases like plague and cholera, and tested their biological weapons on them. And even outwardly, in the heart of democratic countries, evil was not far away. In 1939, in an American orphanage, what later became known as the Monster Study was conducted. Researchers told healthy orphan children that they would develop a stutter, trying to prove that anxiety was the cause of this problem. The result: the children did not stutter, but they suffered deep psychological trauma and lived with anxiety and isolation throughout their lives. The list goes on. The Tuskegee syphilis study, which left hundreds of African American men untreated for the disease for decades just to study its progression. The Guatemala syphilis experiment, where researchers intentionally infected thousands of people with the disease. The CIA's MKUltra project, which tested hallucinogenic drugs on unaware citizens. These historically documented examples raise a fundamental question: what drives a person to become evil? Logical analysis suggests we are all born with innocent, pure goodness. Look at any infant. They don't know hatred, they don't plan harm, they don't hold grudges. Science confirms that empathy and concern for others are fundamental human instincts. But the reality is that life experiences are what make us acquire evil, like fertile soil where seeds of darkness grow. Harsh circumstances, deprivation, abuse, all these factors plant doubt, build walls, and turn a pure heart into an anxious and wary one. This raises a profound question: if goodness is part of our fundamental nature, is evil merely an acquired trait? Could evil simply be a reaction to pain we've suffered? A fortress we built around ourselves because the world wasn't safe? A wound that turned into a scar, and then the scar turned into a weapon? Contemporary philosophical analyses suggest that an evil act often requires a specific motive, not just the infliction of harm. But perhaps at the heart of all this horror, there is a more painful psychological truth. Perhaps evil, in some of its manifestations, is just a distorted cry for help. A scream from a person who has lost connection with their humanity, who no longer sees themselves except through the pain they cause others, because they no longer find value in themselves except in these reactions. And here comes the tale told by some tribes. It's a story that offers us an alternative to the logic of punishment and revenge. It is said that in one tribe, when an individual commits a grave mistake, the tribe members do not strip him of his humanity or ostracize him. On the contrary, the tribe members gather around him, not to remind him of his bad deed, but to remind him of all his good deeds, of all the moments when he was a kind, strong, and loving person. They, in a beautiful way, try to restore his soul which has lost its way. They do not call upon the evil that came from him, but they call upon the good inherent in him. They understand that the person who committed evil is the same person who did good before, and that restoring him will not happen through humiliation, but through reminding him of the beautiful image of himself that he has lost. Though these primitive tribes are often described as ignorant and backward, they created this ancient tradition and practice to combat evil in the most humane way. The question we must ask ourselves now is, where do we stand compared to these simple people? In the end, this might be the greatest resistance to evil, not to believe that its source is supernatural monsters, but wounded humans, and not to respond to it in its own language, but in the language of reminding the human being who can return again, because evil might be a cry for help, and a cry for help needs someone to hear it, not someone to respond to it in kind.